I'm thrilled and delighted to have Chris Ihrig on with me today. Chris, how are you and how are things on the West Coast today?
Justin, I am fantastic. It's a great day. I'm just outside Seattle, and despite what everybody thinks, it is not raining here today. So all's good.
All's good. You got a little sunlight peeking in from behind
Yep.
you, so it looks like a beautiful day. Chris, you and I were introduced to each other from a mutual colleague, and we've had a couple of conversations. You know, Chris is the CEO, Chief Engagement Officer of Fired Up, and so we're going to talk a lot about what Fired Up means and talk about Own It, the book. Chris, you provided me a copy, and I've been plowing through that. And so this is going to be a really exciting chat to talk about leadership principles and culture as a part of Fired Up culture and the work that you all do through the lens of different generations. And I'm really excited, honored to have a copy of the book and to be able to talk about it. But I want to start with you talking about your journey. You've got some deep experience into the nonprofit landscape, and so you're either a recovering nonprofit marketer
Yes.
and leader,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
or still deeply connected to it. So talk to us about your journey.
So thank you. Nonprofit community work's been a key principle and purpose in my life as long as I can remember. At the same time, I've come to realize that organizations, no matter if they're for profit or nonprofit, are a tremendous vehicle to get stuff done. We can each as individual only do so much. You join a community of people and magical things happen. So yeah, I mean, you can tell I've got lots of gray hair, now white hair, and that usually comes back to a career full of things plus raising four kids. Uh, and I found that throughout my professional career, I've kind of deviated between, in terms of my own journey, should I be giving my talent and treasure directly to a nonprofit? Am I better to, give them money and let it go? And I found that my journey into and a part of and supporting nonprofits pretty much came back to where I was professionally, and it's been a very interesting journey. And I there were days where I gave it all, leaned right into a nonprofit, ran a local homeless shelter, to running talent management systems for a global organization called World Vision. I mean, it has done the gamut. Um, but what I have found through the years is that the themes that I'm most passionate about around leadership and culture remain the same, no matter whether it was a nonprofit or a for-profit. And I found that my professional pursuits, my strengths, the things that I thought I could influence the world with the most, were better served if I stayed outside of an organization versus inside an organization. I've done both, but there's something magical that happens when an outside third party says the same thing somebody else is saying inside the organization. They tend to listen a little bit differently. So over the last 15 years, really focused on being an outside entity that could speak into organizations. But yeah, it's always been part of it, even in my what I call a vocational time. I was on my school board for 10 years, things like that. So nonprofits have been a big part of our work today, and will continue to be for a long time going forward.
Yeah, share a little bit about the work that Fired Up Culture does. It's really fascinating through our conversations, learning about it, and like you said, your ability to validate maybe feelings and thoughts, perceptions, observations. Talk a little bit about the how you guys engage with commercial and nonprofit organizations.
Great. Well, it is under the umbrella of culture. Obviously, with the name, it's going to end up being there. But in simplifying it, it boils down to how do we equip leaders to really own the culture? And that wasn't a plug for the book, by the way. It's really I need leaders getting up in the morning, hitting the ground running, and saying, I am the one who can make a difference in wherever I show up. I think sometimes we think culture happens to us. It's something that we receive. It's something that we have to put up with. And not only leaders, but I expect everybody to believe that they can be an influencer in it. And so our work concentrates really on, I think, three key areas: measuring what's going on in a culture. So we have a culture survey that can kind of get data to the conversation. It allows issues to be brought to leadership so that they can wrestle with it and prioritize it. Certainly equipping leaders through our coaching models, and we typically work with a very broad range of leaders within an organization at the same time. So we're kind of coming at it from a lot of different angles. And then I think the third most critical part is we are change agents. So we like to come alongside organizations and help them go from where they are today and steer them, encourage them, facilitate them going in the direction of their preferred future. And that usually over time takes a while, because when you're moving an organization, it doesn't just happen overnight. So it's usually it boils down to bringing data to the conversation, having a good coaching conversation, and then doing some kind of facilitated change management.
That's great stuff, man. Such interesting work, and I know we're going to hear more about it as we talk today. So, we're in the midst. This is our sixth season of Group Thinkers, and the premise that we started the show with was we wanted to do something for nonprofit marketers to help them continuously think about new, emerging, or different ways to do things. And but what's been interesting is somewhere along the way, at least once within every season, we have someone that thinks outside of nonprofit marketing and thinks about um, principles of leadership or organizational development or organizational management. And so I always love whenever we have guests like yourself, Chris, that can help us kind of take a beat and think about things that are connected to certainly what happens within a nonprofit and how nonprofits connect with their constituents, but also kind of elevates the conversation into a different stratosphere. And I think that that's where we're going to go today. We have our Gen X study that we put out, in the last few months, that the premise behind it was that Gen X has been overlooked by nonprofits in large part. That there is a concentrated focus on the silent generation and the boomers and that transfer of wealth. And man, everyone's interested in millennials just because we hear about it so much. And so within that, and as is apropos based off of stereotypes of the generations, Gen X is overlooked, right? It's the middle child. And so, we've dug into that and thought about it from a philanthropy standpoint. Something that we've learned by way of conversations is that there are many people that believe and understand that Gen X is coming into its prime, both in what it means for their connection to nonprofits, but also coming into their prime as being leaders, coming into their prime as starting businesses and being CEOs or other C-suite positions. And so just want to start with a very broad question for you around how have you seen generational perspectives influence leadership styles? So between the boomers and Gen X and millennials, how do you see, what do you encounter in terms of those generational perspectives and the connection to leadership?
Yeah, great question. I need to answer it a little bit more specifically today coming out of COVID, because I think we're seeing more evidence of that shift as organizations wrestle with this return to work thing. It's a real life example. And in my work, in my team's work, we actually have the opportunity to really coach the entire spectrum. Sometimes we are dealing with that seasoned person that's been in the position for 35 years, and they have a very distinct way of thinking because it's been their success model. They've known how they get the job done. And then you've got this middle group, which is the up and comers, the folks who have assumed some leadership roles, and they're trying to figure out, well, I really would like to lead differently than my boss has, but I have to honor these cultural systems that have said this is the way we're always going to do it. And then you've got this younger generation that says, Well, forget all that. We want something really, really different. And COVID has really brought it up specifically around this remote issue. So you have, like the other day, I had a conversation with an executive. He's been in the role for 20 years, same organization, doing things. He is like, I want my people back in the office, 8 o'clock to 5 o'clock. I want to see them at their desk working. His right hand person fits into the Gen X, and she's saying, well, wait a minute, we need to really talk about fluidity in that. Can we all commit to a day in the office and flexibility for certain jobs to be working from other locations? And I think that the current trend is that we have to be more flexible, and leaders who have led a certain way seem to be, from my perspective, kind of missing the heartbeat of what leaders going forward are going to need to have, which is, I'm not going to be, as a leader, in control. I'm going to set up an environment with others going to need to be in control. I'm going to manage performance to results, not to seeing somebody doing the work. I'm going to expect people to, yes, get the job done, but also have certain behaviors in how they get the job done. And so I see this tide now. The conversation is definitely changing between leaders, and depending where you sit on that generational scale, you talk about it differently, you react to it differently, and frankly, you're kind of unpacking your own baggage around what we've historically done to now a new way of thinking. It is definitely very real in today's world.
Yeah, as you're talking about that, and you talk about that tide, just to play into the analogy for a moment, it feels like leadership is no longer driving a bus. Instead, it's captaining a ship, and then you have to ask the question of, okay, well, who's in charge of the direction whenever you're on a ship? Is
Right,
it the water or is it the captain? And so
right.
the water flows a certain way, and the captain has to help navigate that and leverage that alongside the wind and use the stars and the crew of the ship all together. And so it really is interesting. Something that we saw within our study was that amongst that middle group in particular, you can separate them in half, and that there is an older Gen X and a younger Gen X, right? So we dub the older as the hometown heroes because they they see more eye to eye with the boomer, but not exactly. And then there's the younger Gen X, which sees more eye to eye with millennial, but not exactly. And
Yep.
what ran right down the middle of that group is the emergence of technology by way of the internet. So when we've had these conversations, we've talked about, payphones versus mobile phones, right? Or to what extent the sound of connecting to AOL and a modem and all of that rings true in your mind, that that sets up some of that dividing line. And I'm wondering, within your own work, as you have these conversations with leaders and or their other executives, as you mentioned, how that predisposition to technology and that digital divide also influences the way that leaders are currently looking at how to guide their organizations.
Yeah, it's again, I smile because we're all fatigued from COVID, right? But there are some things that COVID did bring to life. This whole idea of remote work versus in-person work, but also use of technology. And to watch how some leaders are just continue to be terrified about, oh my gosh, I've got to get on a Zoom call, and that's not the same as being in a room. And how does that? And I think that technology really across that spectrum is intended to create greater engagement, which is what your business is all about. It's what my business is all about. It's about how do we connect relationships through engagement, and technology, and how we look at technology to leverage that and create those moments is different across all those generations. And some know how to use it better. I wouldn't say I'm the best social media guy in the world, but I'm really comfortable in front of my two monitors and my laptop, right? So I can, there's places in there that I'm really comfortable. And then there's other places where I don't think leaders are comfortable. And depending where you sit, it is part of the conversation that we need to talk about, is how do we leverage, based on where we're sitting, the technology to drive relationships the way we need to.
So we've talked about this almost through the lens of leadership in terms of organizational guidance and management, but we haven't tapped into the culture aspect. And I want to go there for a little bit because, as you said, it's something that clearly anyone that's leading an organization, anyone that's leading a nonprofit can help set a tone for, and help guide along the way what culture looks like, help own a big part of what it looks like. Um, how have you seen the emergence of this newer group of leaders, these Gen X leaders, had an impact on what culture looks like? Some of that same pivots that you've talked about in terms of how we look at remote first versus et cetera. What about on the cultural side? What sort of trends have you seen there, or examples?
Justin, for the sake of the conversation, let me just back up just 1 second. I think most of my conversations, I feel like most people say, yes, culture is really important. So that's a consistent statement for folks. But right behind that is, I don't know what culture means. It's a big word. It's got a lot. And frankly, that's where our whole culture survey process was born from, because we needed to make sense of that for leaders to understand what's important. So let me give you some buckets that fall under culture for me. The first is, are we clear and aligned and passionate around our purpose and goals in the organization? So that's the first place that we start. The second place is, okay, we give people tools. To your technology question, we give people tools. Do we have the right tools to actually get the job done that we're asking people to do? The third is, are we showing up with a leadership culture where leaders are expected to lead and equip and guide and provide expectations and performance management? The fourth is really around teaming and collaboration, right? How do we work together? Because that's the whole purpose of a community, is right. We're not a bunch of individuals. We're a team of people. And then the last thing that we really look at is, okay, what are the environmental factors? Like, do I feel appreciated, respected, things like that? So when we break out culture, that's what we're looking at.
That's a broad spectrum, by the way. That's a that you're hitting every possible closet in the house.
Yes, exactly. It's got a lot of rooms in it. So
Yeah.
when you ask the question about how generations are impacting it, generations have a different expectation with each of those closets, to put your terminology out there. When they show up in a room around, for example, purpose and cause, which, spending some time in the study that you worked on, the purpose and cause is one of the moments where we hook together, where we go, we're on the same page. I believe what you believe, therefore now that I'm connected, I either am inspired to do more, give more, connect more, or I'm just now hanging out with you, or no, we don't have a match here and it's time for me to go somewhere else. So it is the starting point. And a lot of times when we measure culture in for-profit organizations, they don't have an inspiring purpose that causes a level of engagement. Interesting enough, you take a nonprofit, it's almost the reverse consistently. So
a tremendous amount of purpose, and
yes,
maybe missing some of the other aspects.
correct. So
Yeah.
I always look at culture. Do we have a real connection to the heart cause of the organization? And do we have the tools and resources or the processes to really get the job done? So the business side. And what I find is nonprofits tend to really lean on the heart side and not do a lot of work on the business kind of systems to get things done. And the reverse is true in for-profits. Really lean on that whole process, but don't have the good cause base. So generations, I think, look at those two things differently, but also it's become, from where I sit today, it's become important that no matter if you're in a for-profit or a nonprofit, as a leader, both sides have to be looked at and both sides have to be built out. And if we lean too heavy on one or the other, we lose engagement. We won't have the level of engagement that we really want.
there's something that becomes a tendon for me in connecting those two. And I should apologize for the number of analogies that, that I'll use throughout.
It's all good. Yeah, absolutely.
I love a good word picture. So I'm going to go with tendons. So I'm going to go to biology here in a moment. And I think that there is I believe that there's empathy that helps connect the two, because empathy can be evaluated logically whenever it comes to the system side of we're trying to get on the same page about the systems for us to best either go to market or activate these programs or connect with our donors. But then there's also the EQ side of empathy that is about understanding each other's perspectives and understanding how someone might define purpose. And I gotta think that that's been something else that has been um, lit on fire in the last year and a half that organizations are just reckoning with.
Absolutely. You you know, I think organizations found that talent within their system kind of hunkered down over the last 18 months. It's like unless you forced talent to move because of layoffs or whatever, we just hunkered down. We just did our work. As we're coming out of that, talent is now saying, does this process of where I've chosen to do my work really align to who I am? Or should I go find someplace else to do it? And so if we haven't done a good job as leaders to meet all those criteria that I talked about around culture, every time one of those slips, we create a moment for your talent to go, maybe there's someplace else I can go do this. So if I don't have a clear cause or I don't feel connected to the cause, that's going to be a draw for somebody to leave. If I don't have the right tools or resources to get my job done, or you're requiring me to come into the office 5 days a week, I can go find that somewhere else. And so you can literally run down the list, and every time we connect those tendons, so to speak, the engagement goes up. Every time we reduce the connections, it creates this moment of pause or disengagement in the workforce.
And when you talk about that, and I think that ties very nicely into parts of Own It, of that honing in on purpose, trying to stretch and reinforce the tendons. What do you do when you encounter an organization where the purpose isn't connected? Because even by the definition of if generationally or for various other reasons there's a broad sense of connection amongst the purpose, but what if you encounter with say that there's a nonprofit that's tuned in that they know that maybe some of their executive team and their middle management and their associates, that the three define purpose generally the same but specifically different. And how do you coach them? What does that look like in terms of helping work with them to get them to a place of harmony, or at least being able to work together collaboratively?
Yeah, it's a great question. One of the things I find, and this really does come out of the measurements around culture that we do, is that sometimes we think we're clear on what the purpose is. Sometimes we think we're clear on what the mission is. We ask questions around, well, how would you define the purpose of the organization stuff? And I'm sure that your audience as marketers would appreciate this. How one person, looks at one thing and the next person looks at it could be completely different. We think we're on the same page, but it's completely different. So I always start with, let's get really clear. Let's get really clear, not only what we do and the purpose behind it, but what we don't do. And we need to simplify that and make it really a very strong, clear message. Businesses in general, for-profit or non-profit, we get stretched and start to diversify our purpose. And I would make the argument, if you're going to start and really create deep engagement with your, not only your talent, but your clientele customers, you've got to be really clear on what you are and what you're not, and not try and be everything to everybody. When I worked at World Vision and I was running all the talent management systems for the US, my belief was, we're not going to solve poverty. There's no way. It's too big of a problem. It's a meaningful cause. I get that, but it also got legs really quick, and all of a sudden you were doing this over here and you're doing this over here and you're doing all this over here, and that creates moments of disengagement for folks. The second part to the answer is, and we have not talked a lot about this, when it comes to the purpose side of culture, the other thing that is really important to align is my values to your values. I reference it in the book around being a connected values model, where people tend to engage deeply when the values that I need as a person, the things that I believe as a person, align with the values of the organization. And most organizations, secret sauce to my work, most organizations state some kind of values, but they don't necessarily live out those values. They're great words on the wall. They're not real active. Part of our process of measuring what's going on in the culture, basically the feedback of the people, is, do you see this value being talked about and lived out on a daily basis? Well, if it's not, then the person that's experiencing that organization as a client or as a talent will go, that's not resonating with me, going to create that disengagement. If all of a sudden I see it really active in how an associate treats me, how this transaction moved more towards a transformational model, now all of a sudden my values alignment starts to really connect, and now I'm in. Now you've got me. Now I want to give all that I have. And I think we lose those two pieces. So when you talk about purpose, I'm really talking about those two things. I'm talking about the cause of the organization, the thing that we're trying to impact, but then we're also talking about the values alignment. They're both very quickly. They're connected. We need those two things to then get to the next part, which is goals. What are we going to do? What's the work we're going to do? If we don't have those two things, we can't get to that stuff.
It's so interesting the way that, I mean, it sits on the same street as some of the things that we learned in the research, right? So in terms of connecting with prospective donors, and especially amongst, younger donors, purpose is the highest reason that they'll give. An alignment on purpose, that's the number one reason why they will give their time or their talent. In this case, we were talking about their dollars, right? But the number one reason why they stop giving, or number one reason to not give, is what they would call mission drift, which is those moments of disengagement where somewhere along the way, purpose may be there, but values or how it's expressed is different. I've got a colleague who will talk about mission drift. He'll pick up a marketing piece from a nonprofit and be able to reference the number of times that there's I language in that marketing piece versus you language in that marketing piece, which makes it so one-sided that all of a sudden it feels like it's drifting away from the mission, which is trying to solve a problem, right? And so that disengagement, the root drivers for that often start with, as you said, a lack of alignment on those values. So interesting.
Justin, I'd like to share just a brief story, a personal story from my view. So my wife and I have been married 33 years. Over those years, we've had a common theme of some things that we believe are important in our community. Done a lot of work around special needs adults, and both. That's actually where we met many years ago. And so the other day, about a year ago, we got really connected with a local farm that is a live-in facility for adults with disabilities, and they produce farm produce kind of thing, very community-based, if you drove by it, you wouldn't know what it was all about. But it's very, very life-giving and life-changing. And through our work, we had come to know it, but we had not really been donors to this place. And so we started getting more and more actively involved with them about a year ago. And to the point, I felt like for my wife and I, we knew what the purpose was of this organization, but over the year, we've experienced a lot of moments in how we've interacted with them and their communications where their values very much align with them. And one of the things we started doing this year is every Friday between noon and 4, one of us drives up to the farm and we pick up a basket of vegetables that has been produced at this farm. And I came home the other day because I went up last Friday and picked it up. I came home to my wife and I said, it's not a huge basket. It's got a few vegetables in it and a bouquet of flowers for my wife. That is probably the most joyful thing in the thing. But I did walk in and I said to her, this is a moment for me where I feel joy in my interaction. Now, from a money standpoint, I'm not getting huge value for a carrot, right? I can go down to the store and buy a carrot for a lot cheaper, but I don't get that joyous feeling. And I literally came home with that smile and I'm like, there's a lot of things I do in my life where I feel like I give and and we invest and all that. But this is one that really, frankly, is just pure. It's just full. And to the pure comment, to this part of the conversation we're having, it's about that complete alignment. It's the complete alignment between the purpose of that organization, how I see that purpose being lived out every day, but more importantly, every person I interact with and have interacted with over the last year, from their newsletter to their farm staff when I go to pick up the produce, values are consistent. They are like fantastically aligned. And I thought that's what's feeding that connection. That's what we're striving for, both on the culture side and as I believe marketers, as we're trying to connect with an audience in relationships.
Totally agree. And thank you for sharing that. I mean, what a beautiful picture of the fulfillment that is at the heart of fundraising, right? And so, yes, there's marketing that goes into it. And yes, we use like scale and, trying to go to a mass market and convert and all of those things. But at the heart of it is the relationship that you just mentioned. And I think that that's something that it would do us all very well to reflect on that and the impact. And another reason to have conversations with donors, because those things can help reignite purpose even for our internal teams whenever you understand the impact that it has on someone's life to be able to engage with the cause in the organization. Chris, as we kind of round the corner of our time, at the outset, you mentioned the reemergence out of COVID, or our understanding of what it looks like to be leaders in this COVID landscape now, and one of the principles around that being flexibility going forward. I'm just curious of your outlook and what you're saying to your clients, both on the commercial and the nonprofit side, of what are some of the other things that they need to be thinking about or looking for amongst their teams, just to help make sure that things are healthy and that people are in a good spot as we try to find this new sense of normalcy out of what we've been in for the last 16 to 18 months.
The journey that I've been on professionally, again, started about 30 years ago, and specific to this work. And I was in a nonprofit, and one of the senses I got was we as a nonprofit, we did a really good job of taking a body of work, taking a member. There's our first train, by the way. Told you it was going to come. So as I worked in this nonprofit, looking at the kind of the emotions that were going on, and as nonprofits, we're really good at taking talent and squeezing them until there's absolutely nothing left. And culture work and leadership going forward. So I've certainly seen this become more and more of an opportunity within the workplace. Leadership has to give back. Leadership has to find a way to engage and build relationship, and that can't be a one-way street. I can't just ask you to come work for me and squeeze you like a sponge and leave you dry. I have to find ways to invest. So what do I mean by investment when it comes to leadership? It's, do I provide an opportunity for people to use their gifts, strengths, and talents? That job alignment. I know I have a job that needs to be done, so I'm going to hire somebody to do it. I don't want to just hire a body. I want to hire somebody who's really gifted at it. That alignment's really important. Second thing is, once you're in the seat, I want to provide real clear expectations and agreements on how we're going to do the work. This is a place we break down all the time. Expectations of deliverables, expectations around time frames, all of that. Now, a lot of your clientele that are listening to this work in agencies, and we have a lot of agency clients. Fast paced, get the job done by a certain date. Lots of that going on. Lots of pressures there. But the other side of expectation setting is, what behaviors do I expect you to exhibit? Not only as a member of my team, but what expectations you have of me as your leader as we do this work together. And that leads to these agreements. We will never get to accountability if we don't have clarity of expectations, clarity of agreements, and a mechanism for providing feedback to each other. It's the place we struggle with the most. Frankly, that's what keeps me and my team well employed, that space right there. So you've got, give me a chance to do what I believe in and what I'm gifted for, provide really good communication and expectations, but also allow me to grow. Who you received today when I started is not who I want to be 3 years from now, 5 years from now. So we need to have intentional conversations about how you're going to help me along this path. And that's where, again, counter to this, come in, I'm going to squeeze you like a sponge. Now all of a sudden I've got to put back in you. Career development over the years has changed dramatically, Justin. It used to be organizations owned it. Now individuals own it. Organizations have a place. They need to understand it. They need to have tools to help people do it. It's probably a 60-40 split in my mind. 60% is owned by the person, 40% is supported by the organization. That's what creates that level of engagement. And you notice that all of those factors are leadership driven. If a leader doesn't show up, the leader doesn't make themselves available for conversations, if the leader doesn't understand what drives a particular person, and one of the things we try and do as leaders, we try and use our same processes and styles with everybody that's on our team, and everybody's different. You should have a leadership style. You should have a leadership voice. You should have a way that you go about your work, but you can't use the same communication. You can't do the same process. One person you're going to have to meet with on a weekly basis. The next one once a month is more than enough. We have to adapt. And I think the same is true when you talk about engagement with donors, when you talk about engagement with clients, is you have to realize we need to have a message. It needs to be clear, but we also need to adapt to understand, connect, and make those connections really tight based on the individual relationships that are happening. So I love this conversation, Justin, because for me, the world of culture is the same world as marketing. It's all about relationship and it's all about engagement. My work happens to be inside. Your work happens to be outside. When those two worlds come together, that's when the pixie dust happens and magic occurs.
And I really believe that we're at a space now as leaders where the fog is lifting for many, and we're rebooting culture because factors have caused us to rethink things like being remote first or being digital first or being all of those things, both as marketers, but also as humans and as employees. And so we have to rethink culture. It doesn't mean you change culture. It doesn't mean that it inherently changes, but it definitely means that you have to rethink it. You need to spend time and invest in it. And so, yeah, I mean, I eat up everything that you're saying. I absolutely love it. Chris, the book is Own It, but this isn't the only resource. You have a website full of resources and blogs and newsletters. Tell everyone how they can plug in and get connected to you and to your team.
It's you and I've had conversations over the last month. That book is new, but I feel like that was one of the things that has been on my list for about 30 years to do, right? It's like, let's get to it. Let's write it. Finally happened. But that book was never written to be what, pays for my grandchildren's college. I say that because all my kids are now through college, but I believe that the book and every resource that we put out there, whether it's a blog, a monthly newsletter, whatever, is about making an investment. It to me is a way to share a message with people that I care about and want to build relationship with. So any way that you engage with Fired Up, whether it's signing up for our newsletter or blog through the website or picking up the book, I want you to feel like we're investing in you. And as leaders, if you have an inkling to either take what you are as a leader today and get better at it, or become a leader and take on more responsibility, we want to partner with you in that process. That could be individually, that could be as a team, that could be as an organization. We work with it all. We're happy to come alongside. I call them on-ramps. There's a lot of different on-ramps to connecting with us. So definitely visit the website, www.firedupculture.com. That's going to give and sign up for newsletters. But more importantly, I'm in the relational business. What's more important is connect with me on LinkedIn. Let's have a conversation. Let me know what your story is all about. I'll share my story, and let's find a way to connect our stories, because that's what gives me life.
I love that, man. I really appreciate the time that you've put into the conversation today, and the ones that we've had previously, and look forward to our next one. Thanks so much for being on the show and sharing your wisdom and experiences.
Justin, I appreciate it. Everybody be well and safe. Keep the faith. We'll get through this.
We'll get through this. All right, man. We'll catch up down the road.
Sounds good. Thank you, sir.